welcome to another episode of Court Time with Crina Mustafa. I'm Crina Mustafa, and I'm joined by a very special guest today, Baraheni of SDPN Sports.
There you go.
Which he knows this now, but I didn't even realize it's the First Team Tango Podcast Network until like maybe a month ago. So you learn something new every day. Also co-host of the Objective Basketball Podcast, which you guys should totally check that out. I'll have it in the description below. But how you feeling today?
Good. We're like almost 24 hours away from the trade deadline. So if I get a phone call and just like walk away, No, I'm kidding. I'm not gonna do that to you. But yeah, it's an exciting time.
I feel like you might. You might do that to me. But yes, as you mentioned, we will be talking NBA trade deadline. The deadline is February 9 at 3 p.m. So it's going to be kind of a hectic time. The first news, I guess the biggest news, because nothing else has really dropped too much since that news dropped, but Kyrie Irving.
Yeah.
So Dallas Mavericks requested the trade. They got it done, which is kind of surprising because I was kind of in the boat of I don't think they're going to get it done just based on like how trade requests have gone in the past.
Right.
But they did get it done. So I'm curious, like, what was your gut reaction when that news dropped?
I was pretty surprised. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty surprised. I thought it was almost a guarantee he was going to the Lakers just because it's clear from what LeBron has said to what Kyrie has said to all the rumors that you've heard, like that's sort of his end destination. So to me, it was surprising that the Mavericks ended up swooping him, but it's also the price that they paid, which is Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie, and then also a 2029 first-round pick. That
and
was
Markieff
a lot.
Morris too,
and Markieff, yeah, right. That was a lot. Like that's a considerable amount for a guy who has had the history that Kyrie has over the last year, has missed half of the games that he could have played in. Like to be able to pay that price for a guy who, yes, has the on-court talent, but also has like 99% of the other stuff being the off-court mishaps that have happened. So for me, it's surprising, but also it just is not a good move, in my opinion, for the Dallas Mavericks long-term. I don't think so, but yeah.
Yeah, it is a bit of a gamble because obviously, like, if he plays, like, this might as well be like one of the best backcourts in the NBA.
Sure, yeah.
Like, but at the same time, it's like, look at his track record up until now. Like, how much can you trust that he's actually going to take the floor?
You said it was a gamble, right? It's like, is Kyrie Irving the type of player you take a gamble on? Because, like, let's go back and look at, like, another gamble that had happened before. I think a lot of people say the Kawhi Leonard trade to the Raptors was a gamble at the time, right? That gamble makes more sense because there wasn't the awful track history of Kyrie behind Kawhi, despite all the like injury stuff that happened with the Spurs and the drama that happened within that last year he was in San Antonio. But with Kyrie, he's missed half of his games as a Brooklyn Net. He's had like 17 different drama situations, whether it be the vaccine, whether it be these are sagas. Like if I were to go and detail every single aspect, people would get exhausted. So to me, I think the gamble isn't worth the payoff, especially if this doesn't end up being long-term, because he's a free agent this summer. So if they don't end up signing him long-term, that means they've spent that money to essentially have him for 6 months. And if they do sign him on long-term, you just saw what it happens when you have Kyrie Irving for 4 years, which is he misses half the games, he causes 15 different drama stories, and he ends up not being what you kind of expect him to be. So I think it's a bad gamble if we're going back to that. So
do you think that maybe with an organization like the Dallas Mavericks that they might make him feel better in terms of like freedom? Because he said that he felt disrespected by the Brooklyn Nets.
He felt wanted.
Yeah. All of
How
that.
long is that gonna last?
That's true.
We've all been in those situations, whether it be like getting a new job or like getting into a new relationship where there's that honeymoon phase, right? Where like everything is going so well, you love it. Oh my God, this is beautiful. The television is amazing. The setup they have in the locker rooms. Wow, these are such comfy couches, right? Everybody has that feeling, the honeymoon period, but it just it's gonna fall off at some point. It's just the beginning of the end in the Luka era, in my opinion, and I think it's just inevitable that at some point this is gonna break down and not work out. It's just a matter of how, and it's just a matter of when. So
Yeah, I don't even know what to think, because like I want Luka to have help, because I think like with a talent like him, he deserves to be on a team that is setting him up for success. And so we've seen like they've tried to get Luka that partner, like whether it was like Kristaps Porzingis, which obviously didn't work out, but like just stuff like that where now he has Kyrie, and I'm like,
they have a shot. I mean, look, they have the next 3 or 4 months, right, to figure things out, to work through the kinks of how it looks on the court. And also on top of that, like with the Western Conference being wide open, you look at like the Denvers of the world, the Memphises, the New Orleans, the Phoenix, whoever, right? If you're Dallas and you're saying, okay, we might have the best player in every single series. Maybe not against the Nuggets with Jokic. You could probably say Jokic is better. But for most of the games that we would play in the playoffs, we have the best player. So we like our chances. And when you add Kyrie, who is an all-star this season, has had an incredible year. I think he's almost 50, 40, 90 in terms of like his efficiency. So you can, it's a like logically, in theory, it makes sense as a bet. If you never knew who Kyrie Irving was. I was about to say Kanye West, but like it sort of is like, you know, he's the basketball version of it, you know? Yeah. So I just, he is. Think of it like this. Literally, the comparison is almost identical. Incredible talents, right? Unbelievable talents. But all the other extracurricular stuff makes it not worth it. So I don't know.
It's the headline of today's show. That's so funny. But yeah, so we'll see what happens. My biggest thing also, with just this kind of wrap it up, but like even with the Brooklyn Nets, and everybody was kind of placing them as like immediate contenders when they formed the super team of Harden, KD, and Kyrie. And I was like, no.
Too good to be true.
Let's stop. Because super teams are great, but they're still really hard. Like, there's so many factors other than just the basketball part of it. And I think we've seen that come to full bloom with Harden not even being there anymore. Kyrie's not there, and we don't even know what's going to happen with KD.
Kevin Durant,
which we will touch on later on. But let's move to the Toronto Raptors, because you're like, do we have to? Because I think this is like the most people have talked about the Raptors
since the championship, probably.
So it's been a bit upsetting. You asked me before the show how I felt, and I told you I've been shutting my feelings down, which is probably your best bet at this point, because literally, like, we're not going to talk about Pascal getting traded, because that's not happening. But we will start with OG Anunoby, because his name has been circulated like crazy, and it's become this like, how good is he really? Or, you know, like, how much are teams going to offer for him? I looked at Blake Murphy's article on Sportsnet about this is why all your trade ideas are bad. And then some of the teams he had in an OG trade potentially included like the Grizzlies, the Suns, the Pelicans, the Nuggets, the Blazers, and the Pacers. I'm curious to get your thoughts on like, how valuable is OG Anunoby really, and how much should the Raptors be wanting to hold on to him? Like, what kind of offer would you be willing to listen to?
Yeah, I think he's at the point where his value is at his highest. And that's not to say that he won't get better as a player, but if we're talking about value, it most of the time comes down to money. And in a couple of years, in 2024, he's up for a massive extension. He's going to be a $35 million player. Now his value goes down because it's way more to kind of spend on him, and you can't go ahead and trade a player like that as easily. And when you're in a long-term contract like that, the value isn't there. But this is a guy who has 2 years left on his deal. He's 25 years old. He is one of the best defenders in the league, maybe the best wing defender in the league. He was probably going to be in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation this season if the Raptors weren't playing so stinky. So, like, to me, it's just, yes, this guy clearly has an immense amount of value. And the teams that you mentioned, they should value him even more highly because of the fact that, like, look, the Nuggets, the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, the Suns, the whoever in the Western Conference, they're teams that if you slot OG Anunoby into their lineup, one, he becomes a starter immediately. Two, he arguably becomes either their best or their second best defender. And he just opens up so much for them offensively because of the shooting, because of the floor spacing, that I think at the end of the day, he has more value to those teams than another team that would go and acquire him. He also has a tremendous amount of value to the Raptors. And I think that's where there's this give and take. It's like, okay, we have this guy who we could envision seeing in our future, and he's young, and maybe him and Scottie can end up being something in the future together. But at the same time, so many teams hold him to this regard, and maybe we can get something really, really good for what they believe this guy is. So it's just at the point where it's like, hey, if you can get the most for him at this time, you might as well go and see what's out there.
Yeah, and I know we've been talking about like trades that are a gamble, especially like with Kyrie, and like in this situation it feels like a gamble, but obviously for much different reasons.
Yeah.
Also like his health is probably like one of the biggest things, because I think, you know, if you think about the championship year, he didn't play in the playoffs.
I'll push back on that though. I will push back
No,
on
no,
that.
I'm just saying like it is a concern that people have, and like I can totally see it, but like push back.
The only pushback I have, and I don't think you're saying it either, but it's like some of these injuries have been so just unlucky. The championship season.
That's what I was gonna say. Is like it's really not in our control, or like his control of like how these injuries are happening. You
Look,
know?
he burst his appendix. He had a concussion in that 2019 championship run, and that took him out. Outside of his knee injury in college, he's only actually officially on the like score sheet missed one game for a knee injury his entire career. Everything else has been a hip pointer, a finger, a calf. Maybe like a wrist, obviously, what's happening right now. So it's just these random knick-knack injuries. Does that mean he's an injury-prone player, kind of like an Anthony Davis, where like if he falls down, he gets hurt? Yeah, I think the awkwardness of the way that OG plays, like the kind of, he kind of looks like Bambi sometimes with the legs, right? The inflexibility that he has sometimes. But that's part of his game too. And I don't think he's necessarily like injury prone. I don't think there's like injury concerns with him. Whereas like, let's say you look at a guy who has had multiple leg injuries, you'd be like, okay, that's a guy who I don't know if I can rely on or trust in. So it's tougher when you look at, because he's also young and you don't know if at some point in time he ends up being more consistent, more healthy. And like with the Raptors, we always know the topic of discussion is minutes, right? He is near the top of the league in minutes literally every single season almost every single season that he's been a Raptor. So it's tough to be able to like rationalize him being injury prone versus the circumstance that he's in, you know? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been like a very big OG fan. Like I would rather, I know there's this whole like debate about like Raptors fans being super sentimental and wanting to keep their core, but I think we just see the potential in a lot of these guys. And I think OG is like a good example of that. So we'll see. I'm going to the Raptors game on Friday, so that's after the trade deadline.
Okay.
We'll see if he's still the Utah Jazz. So we'll see if he's still a Raptor then. I'm really hoping he is. But another Raptor in trade conversations is Gary Trent Jr. Some of the teams have been the Suns, the Bucks, the Knicks, the Spurs, the Lakers, the Mavs. There was also one trade suggestion in that Blake Murphy article that sends him to the Nets in return for Joe Harris, which I don't know, I just found kind of funny just based on like they're kind of like very similar players.
Shooters, right?
So like to me it's more of just like, okay, if wherever you're trading him, are you getting that same or better offensive power back? Because like if you're getting somebody if you trade him for a non-shooter, what have you just done to yourself, like as a Raptors
like the
team?
Jakob situation.
Exactly, right? So yeah, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that and like what his value would be.
So like if you asked me this 5 months ago, I would have said Gary Trent Jr. is 100% getting traded at the trade deadline. But as the months have progressed, I have kind of walked off that cliff a little bit more. I've walked off the edge. I don't think he gets traded anymore. I think the way, you know, from what we've heard is like the way he dealt with being benched and bounce back from that, him dealing with injuries earlier this season and bouncing back from that held value for the Raptors front office. That was something where they're like, oh, this is an admirable quality in a player. And I think the way he's looked in the last couple of months, the way he shot the ball, the way he's kind of like he looks better, right? and that's always going to be the case with Gary. He's a streaky shooter, so it's going to be ups and downs consistently. But in terms of, look, he's a young guy. He's a guy who's up for an extension. Apparently, his extension won't be as pricey as people imagine. I think it'll probably be in the $22 million range. And if you look at it from that point of view, you're like, okay, now it makes more sense to potentially keep him. Because if it's not going to be a $25+ million contract, it might be 20 to 22. It makes it more salvageable to be like, all right, I'm going to be okay with Gary kind of being on this roster and figuring out what happens next. Because, like, the other aspect is it's hard to find guys who can consistently shoot the ball. Although some would argue it's easy to find guys like that that's going to do that. But to do it consistently, It's hard, especially at a young age. That's also difficult to find. So I think they end up keeping Gary. I think so.
Yeah, and I like what you said about like adjusting his role and like being open to that, because I think that's something that kind of goes underrated on teams, because like everybody's always looking for like those superstars, but those players who are able to just kind of insert themselves wherever you ask them to and just do what their job is and just like supply or supplement the roster that way is really important. So yeah, I really agree with that. I think though, like if he were to get traded, it'd have to be like something that was also super worth.
Yeah, he's
like,
also hosting an event literally 30 minutes after the trade deadline. So I very much so doubt like he's doing a KFC event in Toronto and he's like I don't know, a New Orleans Pelican or something like that. I doubt that'll happen. So
that'd be, can you imagine?
Yeah, that would be wild.
But anyway, we'll see. If you're going to that event and he's no longer a Raptor, say goodbye, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But the last Raptor that I did want to talk about is Fred VanVleet, because he's, man, oh man, the discourse around Fred is all over the place sometimes, it feels like. What is the goal for the Raptors here? Like trading Fred, I think the trade that most intrigued me was to the Suns, but like we would have to like get maybe DeAndre Ayton back or like a Cam Johnson back in that, but I don't know if the Suns would be willing to give those guys up. So like I'm curious, like what is your thoughts on Fred and like the Raptors kind of direction here?
I will say from what I've heard, the people who actually run these front offices value Fred VanVleet more than the Raptors fan base values Fred VanVleet, because I think there's this sort of reluctance to commit to him long term, and I think that's totally fair given the fact that he's 29, almost 30 years old. He has the leg injuries and knee injuries like we were talking about with OG. Like he has the consistent leg injuries that you've mentioned. So yeah, there's questions there about committing to a guy for $30 plus million a year for like 4 or 5 years. That's a tough pill to swallow if you're a team. I think that's why you hear him in trade discussions, because he might walk away in the summer. He could go and sign with the Orlando Magic, who are a team that are interested in him, and they can sign him to a deal outright. It wouldn't even be a sign and trade, so he'd walk away for nothing and you'd leave with nothing. And that's something tough that you also don't want to happen. So his name being mentioned in conversations is not surprising. Him also being valued by other front offices is not surprising because of the reputation that he's built as a playoff player, as a guy who's been an all-star last year, as a shooter, defender, etc. It's not surprising to me that other teams want him. And to your point about the Suns, I think the reason they're looking to go and acquire him is because they have a older point guard that they just want to get a little bit younger. They want a better fit with Devin Booker. And I think like maybe that's something that makes sense. Maybe you see the Suns cave. The ownership group with the Suns is the most interesting aspect of this, is because like when a new owner comes to an NBA team, they get so excited and they want a trade to go down and they want to be a part of that trade. So maybe they become more aggressive and they're like, yeah, can we get Fred VanVleet? Yeah, let's do it. That's genuinely sometimes like when you see a new puppy or a new toy, or, you know what I mean? That's
the
how new
honeymoon
owners
phase
feel.
again.
It is. It's the honeymoon phase all over again. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if he actually gets traded, but it definitely makes sense that they're listening to, offers and whatnot.
Okay, so that kind of ends our Raptors talk, but we'll talk about some other guys on the market, because I'm curious if like any more big moves are going to occur. I saw somebody mention Jordan Clarkson, and like why is he not on anybody's trade list? I feel like he's one of those like guys that could fill a role. Kind of like the way like Gary Trent Jr. does. Or I know Bones Highland, his name has been circulated a bunch.
For sure.
Especially in like Raptors rumors, I feel like. I don't know if I would, like, it really depends on like what are we giving up to get him back. Like could he bring, like, what kind of value would he bring to a team?
I think the idea would be, and I don't know, I guess this is just me like racking my brain around it, but if you end up trading an OG for multiple picks, or if you end up trading Gary for a couple picks or Fred for a couple picks, you can use one of those picks and go get Bones Highland, and now it's okay, you trade Fred VanVleet for, I don't know, Mo Bamba, Bones Highland, and Cole Anthony or something like that. Now you're like, oh, okay, that return kind of makes a lot more sense to you. But I don't know if that's something that's interesting to them. If we're talking specifically to the Raptors, I don't think Jordan Clarkson makes sense because he's also a free agent this summer. He's looking for a payday. So it's like, okay, who would you rather pay? Jordan Clarkson, who's 26, 27, versus Gary Trent Jr., who's 23, 24. Yeah. Sort of provide similar things. Like, just pick whoever you find more interesting at that point. I think the Jazz are really interesting though, because they have Malik Beasley, they have Jared Vanderbilt, Clarkson, like you mentioned, Mike Conley. I would imagine that maybe even before we finish the show, the Lakers deal goes through with Russ and the 2 picks going to Utah, and then some kind of combination of those 3 going to the Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
How much that helps the Lakers? They're in a tough position. They're like 5 games under 500, and they have to climb the rankings very, very quickly. But I think that's something that probably goes down.
Yeah, I can see that happening for sure. Okay, last thing.
Talk to me.
Hot take.
Yeah.
Is KD going to still be a net at the end of this trade deadline?
At the end of the trade deadline, I will say at the end of the trade deadline, yes. I think he will be a net. It's so hard. Imagine like LeBron 24 hours before the trade deadline is like, hey, I would like to get traded. Obviously, he can't get traded right now. But that caliber of a player, like dealing with the amount of calls and figuring out how to move a guy like that and what the value for a guy like that is in the trade deadline seems impossible. I just don't know how a front office would be able to do that like efficiently and properly. But at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't be the craziest thing that's happened in the NBA if Kevin Durant is traded tomorrow. So I wouldn't be shocked, but I will say no right now.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Es.
Appreciate it.
This was super fun. If you have anything you want to promote, where people can find you, go ahead.
Yeah, we are having a trade deadline show tomorrow from 2 to 4 p.m. on SDPN's YouTube channel. You can go and check it out. It'd be dope if you do. We're going to be talking live, talking through all the deals and everything that happens. So come and pull up.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you guys for tuning into Court Time. And we'll be back with another episode next week.